In this segment, we will be tracing the events that led directly to armed conflict. That is, the American Revolution. We've already talked about the ideas, the philosophies behind it. Now, let's talk about the actions. We want to analyze why did the colonists really want their independence? What took place in order for us to finally say, we don't want to be part of the mother country anymore? And did they all agree? Did all colonists feel that it was in our best interest to separate from mother country England? Remember, we were provoked by ideas. We were provoked by ideas of enlightenment, that new relationship that we felt we should have with our governing bodies, that we have the power, not them. Their power comes from us, that they have certain obligations, including to protect us, our property, and our rights. And if they don't do their job, then we need to do something about it. And we also had this perception of unfairness. We did not believe we were getting a fair shake as English citizens. We believed that we were denoted to second class, to the second cousin, to somebody who just wasn't as important as those who lived in England itself. Well, what did the French have to do with this? They actually had quite a bit to do with this. The French and Indian War actually was one of the main causes of the American Revolution. Back in the 1750s, recall, the French were dominating the central part of North America. The British also had interest in the central part of North America. And with these competing colonial interests, it only seemed that conflict was inevitable. When war broke out in Europe in the 1750s, it spilled over into the colonies. And so when we're talking about the causes right here, we're looking at the area that's directly above my head, this area right there, the Ohio River Valley. England wanted it, France had it, we're going to have to fight. And so we did. We fight a war with the French. This was English versus the French. The Indians fought on the side of the French. If you recall back in one of our earlier segments, the English did not treat the Indians so well. The Spanish, even worse. But the French and the Native Americans did seem to get along a little bit better. And so when left with the choice, who do we fight with? Most of the Indians chose to fight with the French. At the end of this war, in 1763, we were victorious. When all was said and done, the French were driven out, essentially, of North America. They lost. We were the big winners. We had all of this land. We had these colonial holdings in the Ohio River Valley, and we were now free. We were poised. We were ready to go out there. We wanted to grab more land, have more farms, make more money. That's what it was always about. We were excited. We were thrilled to be British. We couldn't be happier. We were part of the strongest nation in the world. Things were going great. Until you better believe Mother Country is going to have something to mess this up. There was an end of what we call salutary neglect. I mentioned earlier that most of the colonists hated the idea of a mercantile system. That is to say, trade limitations where we could only trade with Mother Country. Well, what was happening was Mother Country was turning the other way. English captains, sea captains, were not confiscating our contraband. When we tried to smuggle, it pretty much went unnoticed. A bribe here, a bribe there. That was called salutary neglect. It was beneficial to both of us for them to neglect this illegal activity. But at the end of the French and Indian War, the Mother Country brought these laws back to the front and said, you will obey all of these laws. Suddenly, rules that we hadn't been following for years now were being strictly enforced. We didn't like that. Also, we were ready to move. We were ready to go out west seize more land, get more stuff, make more money. But Parliament issued the Proclamation of 1763. This said that no colonists were allowed to move west of the Appalachian Mountains. How could this be? What was Parliament waiting for? Couldn't they tell that we had fought very, very hard for this land, that we had won it fair and square, stolen it from the French because we're bigger and stronger and faster than they are, and now it was ours for the taking, and now Mother Country wants to hold us back? We talked about the word perceived unfairness. Mother Country could not afford to protect us out there. If the colonists moved west of the Appalachian Mountains, chances are the remaining French soldiers, or the Indians, would kill us. And so Mother Country said, hey guys, just wait for a while. Eventually we'll have the troops, we'll send you out there, we'll build some forts, and we'll be able to protect. But we were Americans. We wanted it now. Furthermore, new taxes began to pop up. We'd been paying taxes to our colonial governments since the very beginning. Virginia was paying taxes, Massachusetts was paying taxes, Delaware was paying taxes, Maryland. All 13 colonies were paying taxes to the colonial governments for colonial things. We were not about to pay taxes back to Mother England. And can you imagine how shocked we were when they passed things like the stamp tax, a tax on paper, a tea tax. Can you imagine a tax on our favorite beverage, tea? And of course, sugar was also being taxed. Parliament felt that these taxes were necessary. It's expensive to fight a war, and we had to pay off of all of these debts that we had incurred from fighting the French and Indian War. But we here in the colonists, we didn't quite see it that way. We thought we were being overburdened, too much taxes, we didn't want to pay them, even if it was for land that we would benefit from and to pay for soldiers that would come over and protect us. Resistance began to mount. It started with protests. We protested the taxes. We even flat out refused to pay some of these taxes. We set up boycotts. Not a single stamp was ever sold in the colonies, so no taxes were ever collected from that. Sometimes a tax collector might be captured, tarred, feathered, perhaps vandalized. But protests mounted. We began to do a little more smuggling. We began to make our own materials rather than buy British-made goods. Slowly we began this protest to say, hey, look, we're not going to put up with this for very much longer. We will simply refuse to pay. The protest turned violent. In 1770, in the streets of Boston, violence erupted when a crowd of protesters challenged a regiment of, I should say a small regiment, of about 8 or 9 British soldiers. When they were confronted with literally hundreds of colonists in the streets, the British opened fire. We're not sure that anyone was given the order to fire or what the exact cause was, though we do know that in the end, 5 colonists lay dead. We called this a massacre. Even though it was a riot that was being put down by British troops, those troops were held accountable. They were put up on charges, and all but one was found not guilty. The Boston Massacre. Wait a minute, a massacre? 5 people? Yes, it was, because it made good press. And when they read about this Boston Massacre in Georgia, in Maryland, in Virginia, we began to take notice. Things sort of settled down a little bit until more taxes, more acts, more protests, more troops began to show up, and finally, the Sons of Liberty in Boston had had enough. In protest of the tea tax, the Sons of Liberty decided to dress up like Native Americans, forcibly board this ship, and throw the Dutch, the East India Tea Company's tea overboard. That was the British East India Tea Company. We were drinking the Dutch's at the back. Well, needless to say, the captain was a little bit upset. We had destroyed the entire cargo. Not only had we refused to buy it, we vandalized. We destroyed it. Yay us, way to go America. The British didn't see things quite so smoothly. They felt that perhaps we should be punished. They thought that this type of vandalism and reckless behavior needed to be corrected. They passed what we called the Intolerable Acts. They sent over more forces and made the colony of Massachusetts pay for it. They closed the port of Boston until all the tea was paid for. They suspended the Massachusetts charter for its government until it could prove it could handle its own affairs. And there were several other minor things involved in these intolerable acts, but altogether, the colony of Massachusetts said, these are intolerable. Now, a lot of the other colonies would quickly look at that and say, well, it's just Massachusetts. Ah, yes. But if it can happen in Massachusetts, it can happen to you. This was a time of emergency. Something had to be done. And we, as American colonists, knew just what to do. We had a meeting. We had the First Continental Congress. All the colonies, except Georgia, sent a representative. And this was the first time that the colonies really acted together. They decided two things in this meeting. Number one, they decided we ought to write a letter. And that letter, we will express our extreme disconcern. We will say, hey, look, King, it's time to back off. Hey, look, King, hey, look, Parliament, we've had it up to here. We want to stay good British loyal citizens, but if you push us anymore, bad things might happen. The second thing we did was almost an afterthought. The First Continental Congress agreed, let's give it a year. This is in 1774. Let's give it a year. Let's allow the king to respond. Let's see if things get better. If they get better, we'll come back, we'll meet again, congratulate each other, job well done. If they get worse, we will meet again as well and take the next step. Most importantly, we will meet again. Well, before everything could happen, before the Second Continental Congress could come back around, things got worse. We're not sure if King George ever read that letter from Parliament, but we do know that shots were fired. In Lexington and Concord, the Minutemen of Massachusetts stood up to an armed British regiment that was looking for perhaps John Hancock, as well as Samuel Adams, and also looking for weapons that the colonists were stockpiling. The British never found the weapons, but they ran into these Minutemen. These are volunteers. These are citizens of Massachusetts who came together on a minute's notice to fight them off. Suffering shots from in front, behind, and from side to side, the British were forced back to Boston. They retreated. And this was a small victory for America, but it came to be known as the shot heard round the world. While it was only a small skirmish, lasting only a few minutes, it impacted the rest of the world because this is going to be the beginning of the American Revolution. Everybody was on board, right? Did everyone want independence? As we have Patrick Henry sitting here, give me liberty or give me death? Well, certainly the Patriots did. They supported the ideas of independence. They sided with Thomas Paine and common sense, and they believed that the only logical outcome would be separation from England. But there were also a fair number of loyalists. As many as 1/3 of the American colonists might have been loyalists, that is, loyal to the British crown. Perhaps they realized that even though bad things are happening, it was still good to be part of the British government, of the strongest nation in the world. Even though bad things were happening, perhaps economically we were stronger. And maybe, just maybe, we did owe higher taxes to pay for a French and Indian War that we were the beneficiaries of. Throughout the colonies, we had those who would classify themselves as neutrals. Their lots would be good with separation. Perhaps they'd be okay if we stayed with England. Basically, they did not want to be on the losing side. These were the undecided. As many as a quarter of the American colonists could be classified as neutrals, not quite falling into one side or the other. Perhaps praising George Washington as the flag came by, or God Save the King when the British troops walked by. So not everyone agreed on independence. In our next segment, we are going to take a look at the battles as they occurred and how we brought about victory for America and started a new age for the rest of the world.